The silence in a cheap motel room has a specific texture. It's not the peaceful, expensive silence of a custom-built home with soundproofed walls. It's a thin, fragile silence, stretched taut over the sounds of a faulty ice machine down the hall and the groan of a truck's air brakes on the nearby highway. I used to be a connoisseur of silence. The silent hum of a luxury sedan, the reverent hush of a Michelin-starred restaurant, the profound, satisfying quiet of a bank statement showing a seven-figure balance. Now this $20 a night silence is my new reality, and it's the loudest thing I've ever heard. It screams one word over and over: failure. I wasn't born into money. I was born into a world of second-hand clothes and the lingering smell of worry. My father was a good man, an honest man, but he was a man who worked with his hands and was always one broken-down car away from a financial crisis. I loved him, but I swore I would never be him. My God was the stock market. My religion was real estate. I dedicated my life to understanding the intricate, beautiful, and brutal mathematics of wealth. I started with nothing, a few $100s saved from a landscaping job in college. I taught myself to read financial reports, to understand market trends, to see the patterns in the chaos that other people just called the economy. My first big win was a small, undervalued tech stock that I bought just before it exploded. The feeling was electric, a surge of power and validation that was more potent than any drug. I was hooked. I wasn't a gambler, I was a surgeon dissecting the market with a cold, analytical precision. I built my empire brick by digital brick. I traded stocks and options, then moved into real estate, buying up distressed properties, renovating them, and flipping them for a profit. I learned the power of leverage, how to use the bank's money to multiply my own. My net worth grew, first steadily, then exponentially. By the time I was 35, I was a millionaire, not on paper, but in real, liquid assets. My life became a reflection of the numbers in my portfolio. I built our dream house, a sprawling monument of glass and cedar overlooking a lake. It was a house designed for a magazine cover, with an infinity pool that bled into the horizon and a kitchen that would make a professional chef weep. I bought the cars, the watches, the tailored suits. I was creating an ecosystem of success, a fortress of wealth to protect my family from the world of worry I had grown up in. My wife, who had been with me since the days of the rusty pickup truck, was the perfect partner. She managed our life with a quiet, graceful efficiency. She never questioned my financial decisions. Why would she? I had a Midas touch. Everything I touched turned to gold. I provided a life for her and our two children that was a universe away from the one we had started in. They had the best schools, the best clothes, the best vacations. I gave them the world. What I didn't give them was my time. I was a ghost in our perfect home, a benevolent but distant God who provided the paradise but rarely walked in its gardens. My office was my temple. My true family was the blinking green and red lights of my trading screen. My adrenaline came not from playing catch with my son in the backyard, but from closing a multi-million-dollar real estate deal. I loved them fiercely and absolutely, but I expressed that love through providing security. My passive income from my rental properties and dividend stocks was a river of gold that flowed into our accounts every month, a constant, soothing current that I believed was eternal. I had done more than just escape my father's life. I had conquered it. I had beaten the system. I saw risk not as a danger, but as an opportunity to be managed, a beast to be tamed. And in my arrogance, I began to believe the beast was my pet. The deal that broke me was the biggest of my career. It was a massive commercial real estate development in an emerging market overseas. The potential returns were staggering, the kind of numbers that could elevate me from merely rich to a true titan, the kind of man whose name is whispered with awe. My financial advisors, the cautious old men who preached diversification and slow growth, warned me against it. They spoke of geopolitical instability, currency fluctuations, and a lack of transparency. Their risk management models flashed red, but I saw them as dinosaurs. They didn't understand the new world, the new global economy. I saw their caution as fear. I had built my empire on bold moves, on seeing opportunities where others saw only risk. This was my masterpiece. It required me to leverage everything. I took out massive loans against my real estate portfolio. I sold a huge portion of my safe blue-chip stocks. I essentially pushed my entire fortune, the work of my entire adult life, onto a single massive bet. My wife was nervous. For the first time, I saw a flicker of real fear in her eyes. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice small. "It feels different." I gave her a confident smile, the one that had always reassured her. The biggest risk is not taking one, I said, a line I had read in some book about billionaires. This is for us, this makes us safe forever. The irony of that statement is a physical pain, a sharp, twisting knife that still finds me in the dead of night. For the first 6 months, I was a genius. The project was ahead of schedule, the initial leasing agreements were strong, and on paper, my net worth doubled. I was insufferable in my arrogance. I had proven the dinosaurs wrong. I was the master of the universe. Then the world changed overnight. A sudden, unexpected political coup in the country where my project was located. The new regime was hostile to foreign investment. Capital controls were imposed. The currency plummeted. My masterpiece, my tower of genius, became a toxic asset, a stranded whale on a hostile beach. It happened so fast I couldn't even react. The news broke while I was asleep. I woke up to a blizzard of frantic emails and a stock market in freefall. But the real terror came in the form of a single, polite, and utterly merciless email from my bank. It was a margin call. The value of my leveraged assets had plummeted, and I needed to deposit millions of dollars in cash within 24 hours to cover the shortfall, or they would begin liquidating my entire portfolio. It was a death sentence. I didn't have millions in cash. It was all tied up in the frozen development project. I sat in my beautiful, soundproofed office, the early morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and I watched a decade of my life's work evaporate in a matter of hours. The bankers were not emotional. They were just executing a contract. They sold my stocks at rock-bottom prices. They seized my rental properties. The river of gold didn't just dry up. It reversed its flow, becoming a torrent of debt that swept away everything in its path. By noon, I was no longer a millionaire. By sunset, I was something far worse. I was a man who had everything and was about to find out what it meant to have nothing at all. The unraveling was a slow, agonizing demolition. It wasn't a single, clean blow. It was 1,000 small cuts that bled my life away. The first thing to go was the illusion of control. For years, I had been the master of my financial destiny. Now I was at the mercy of forces I couldn't even reason with: bankers, lawyers, and bankruptcy trustees. They spoke a cold, clinical language of liquidation and liability, a language designed to strip away your humanity and reduce you to a balance sheet. And my balance sheet was a horror show. The loss of the house was the most symbolic death. It wasn't just a structure of wood and glass. It was the physical embodiment of my success. It was the fortress I had built for my family. The day the foreclosure notice was hammered onto the grand oak door, a part of me died with it. My wife tried to be strong for the kids, for me, but I could see the terror behind her eyes. The life she had known, the security she had taken for granted, was dissolving like sand through her fingers. The foundation of our marriage, which I had naively believed was love, was actually a complex alloy of love and security, and I had just vaporized the security part. The arguments started. They were quiet at first, filled with the tense, unspoken accusation that I had failed, that I had betrayed her trust. Then they grew louder, fueled by the fear and the shame. I would try to explain, to strategize, to talk about a comeback, but my words were hollow. I was a general with no army, drawing up battle plans in the dirt. She saw me not as a fallen hero, but as a fool who had gambled away their children's future. The children knew something was wrong, even if they didn't understand the details. The easy, sun-drenched rhythm of their lives was broken. The horseback riding lessons were canceled. The private school tuition went unpaid. They felt the tension in the house, the way their parents would stop talking the moment they walked into a room. I saw confusion and fear in their eyes, and it was a reflection of my own profound failure. We had to move out of the house. We couldn't afford to rent anything comparable. We ended up in a small, cramped apartment in a part of town we used to avoid. The contrast was a daily, brutal punishment. Every cracked tile in the bathroom, every peeling patch of paint on the wall was a testament to how far we had fallen. The ecosystem of our wealth collapsed. The friends who had been a constant presence at our dinner parties, the ones who had laughed at my jokes and drunk my expensive wine, they all vanished. My phone, which used to ring constantly with business deals and social invitations, fell silent. I was a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about at the country club I could no longer afford. For a few months, I tried to fight. I looked for work in the financial sector, the only world I knew, but my name was toxic. My spectacular failure was the stuff of industry legend. No one would touch me. I was a stain on the immaculate ledger of success. My wife found a job as a receptionist at a doctor's office. It was the first time she had worked since our children were born. I saw the quiet dignity with which she went to work every day, and the shame I felt was a physical illness. She was doing what I couldn't, providing. She was dealing with reality while I was still clinging to the ghost of my former life. The final break came on a rainy Tuesday night. I had just come from another failed job interview, another polite rejection. I was soaked, defeated, and filled with an impotent rage. She was in the small kitchen making a simple dinner of pasta. The silence between us was so heavy I could barely breathe. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her back to me. "I can't live with a ghost. I can't watch you torture yourself. The kids, they need a life, not this constant state of mourning for a life we can't get back." I had nothing to say, no defense, no promises left to make. I had promised her a fortress, and I had led the enemy to its gates. "I'm taking the children to my sister's place for a while," she said, her voice steady, but I could hear the fracture in it. "We need a break. We need to breathe." I knew it wasn't a break. It was an ending. She was taking the last valuable assets from our bankrupt life and putting them in a safe place away from me. I didn't try to stop her. I had no right. I had lost the right to be a husband, to be a father, when I pushed all our chips onto the table for my own ego. I helped her pack the car the next day. The movements were mechanical, robotic. We didn't speak. The children were crying, confused. My son wouldn't look at me. My daughter hugged my leg and asked me if I was coming. I knelt and told her I loved her, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I stood on the curb and watched the beat-up station wagon, the one she had to buy after we sold her luxury SUV, drive away. I watched until its taillights were just two small red dots in the distance, and then they were gone. I was alone. Utterly, completely alone in an empty apartment with nothing but the clothes on my back and a debt so large it felt like a physical object, a mountain pressing down on my chest. That night I couldn't stay in the apartment. The silence was too loud. I took the few dollars I had in my pocket, got in my old car, the one I had before the money, and I just drove. I ended up at a cheap motel on the interstate, a place I would have never even noticed in my old life. I paid the clerk in cash for one night. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and regret. I lay on the stiff polyester bedspread and stared at the water-stained ceiling. I was a millionaire. I had everything I ever wanted. And now I was here. It wasn't the bottom. The bottom is a place from which you can climb. This was a void, a complete and total erasure of a life. The motel room became my world. The first night bled into a week, the week into a month. I paid for the room by selling the last vestiges of my old life, my expensive watch, my laptop, my wedding ring. Each transaction was a small, painful amputation, severing the final connections to the man I used to be. I was living in a state of suspended animation. My days had no structure. I would sleep until noon, the thin, cheap curtains doing little to block out the harsh light of a world I no longer felt a part of. I would watch mindless television, the cheerful, plastic lives on the screen a bizarre counterpoint to my own bleak reality. I didn't talk to anyone. I was a ghost, haunting the periphery of life. My diet consisted of vending machine snacks and cheap coffee from the motel lobby. I lost weight, my expensive suits hanging on my gaunt frame like a scarecrow's clothes. My reflection in the grimy bathroom mirror was a stranger, a man with haunted eyes and the geography of failure etched onto his face. The money eventually ran out. The day I couldn't pay for the room was the day the void began to take on the texture of real, hard desperation. The motel manager, a man with a permanently weary expression, told me I had until 6 o'clock to leave. I packed my few remaining belongings into a plastic grocery bag and walked out into the searing afternoon sun. I was officially homeless. That first night, I slept in my car in a 24-hour supermarket parking lot. The indignity of it was absolute. I would recline the driver's seat, trying to find a comfortable position, the steering wheel digging into my side. I would watch families come and go, their shopping carts filled with the mundane stuff of life, a life I was now watching from behind a pane of dirty glass. I was invisible to them, a piece of human debris they would glance at and quickly forget. To survive, I had to find work. It was a terrifying prospect. My entire professional identity was gone. I was a 40-year-old man with soft hands and a resume that was both intimidating and useless. I started at the bottom. I walked into fast food restaurants, gas stations, and convenience stores asking if they were hiring. The looks I got were a mixture of pity and suspicion. I was overqualified and clearly out of place. After dozens of rejections, I found a job. It was a graveyard shift, from midnight to 8 in the morning, washing dishes at an all-night diner. The owner, a grizzled Greek man named Gus, hired me without even looking at my application. He just looked at the desperation in my eyes and seemed to understand. The work was brutal and humbling. I stood in a small, steaming alcove, my hands plunged into greasy, hot water for 8 hours a night. The noise was constant. The clatter of plates, the roar of the industrial dishwasher, the shouts of the short-order cooks. My back ached, my hands became raw and chapped, and I was perpetually covered in a thin film of grime. But something strange happened in that steamy, chaotic hell. For the first time in a very long time, my mind was quiet. The work was so physically demanding, so mindless, that I had no energy left for self-pity. My world was reduced to the simple, tangible task in front of me: get the plates clean. There was a purity to it, an honesty that had been absent from my old life of abstract financial maneuvering. I was no longer moving numbers on a screen. I was scrubbing egg yolk off a plate, and at the end of each shift, Gus would hand me a small envelope with my wages in cash. Holding that crumpled wad of bills, money I had earned through my own physical labor, felt more real, more satisfying than any six-figure wire transfer I had ever received. It was a wage, not an income. It was the result of work, not a transaction. I saved enough money to rent a room, a small, clean space in the basement of a family's house. It wasn't much, but it was a home. It had a bed that wasn't on wheels and a door that I could close. After months of freefall, it was the first piece of solid ground I had touched. With that small measure of stability, I found the courage to call my wife. I had no idea what to say, what to expect. My heart was pounding as I dialed the number. She answered, her voice wary, guarded. I didn't make excuses. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I just told her I was okay. I told her I had a job, that I was washing dishes. I told her I was sorry. Not just for losing the money, but for the man I had become in the pursuit of it. I told her I had been a bad husband and a distant father, and that I was trying to figure out how to be a better man. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "The kids ask about you." It wasn't a promise, it wasn't a reconciliation, but it was an opening. It was a thread. A few weeks later, she let me talk to them on a video call. Seeing their faces for the first time in months was like a physical blow. They had grown, they looked happy. I felt a pang of jealousy and a wave of profound gratitude. My wife was a good mother, she had protected them. I didn't try to be the fun, rich dad they remembered. I was just a tired-looking man on a small phone screen. I asked them about their school, their friends. I listened. I just listened. At the end of the call, my daughter held up a drawing she had made. It was a picture of our old house, the one with the lake. "I miss our home," she said, her voice small and sad. My heart broke, but I knew I couldn't lie to her. "I know, sweetie," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "I do too, but home isn't a building. Home is about us. It's about love." I didn't know if she understood. I barely understood it myself. But as I sat in my small basement room after the call, I realized it was the truest thing I had said in years. My old life, my empire of things, was gone, and in its place I was starting to build something new, something small and fragile, something I couldn't put a price on. The journey back was not a journey back to wealth. That life was a foreign country to which my visa had been permanently revoked. It was a journey back to myself. The work at the diner became my monastery. It taught me humility. My coworkers were men who had lived hard lives, men who had never had a fortress of savings to protect them. They lived paycheck to paycheck, but they found joy in small things: a shared joke, a cigarette on a break, the camaraderie of surviving a busy shift together. They didn't care about my past. They just cared if I could keep up with the dishes. I was not a fallen millionaire to them. I was just the guy on the night shift, and in their acceptance, I found a strange kind of peace. I was no longer defined by my spectacular failure. I was just a working man. The video calls with my children became the fixed point of my new life. They were my true north. I saved up my meager earnings and sent them small, thoughtful gifts for their birthdays, things I knew they would like, not things designed to impress. A book for my daughter who loved to read, a set of drawing pencils for my son who had a budding artistic talent. These small gifts, paid for with hours of scrubbing pots, meant more to me than any luxury car I had ever bought. My ex-wife and I found a new way of communicating. The anger and resentment slowly faded, replaced by a kind of weary, respectful partnership. We were two people bound by a shared history and a deep love for our children. We would talk about their progress in school, their health, their dreams. We became allies in the project of their happiness. She never asked me for money I didn't have. She never used my failure as a weapon. She had her own life, her own job, and she was, in her own quiet way, a survivor. I eventually left the diner. Gus, my boss, had a cousin who owned a small hotel and he needed a night manager. The pay was a little better, the work was less physically punishing, and it was a position of trust. It was a small step up, but for me, it felt like a giant leap. I was being trusted with something again. I was reliable. My new life was simple and it was small. I lived in my basement room. I worked my night shifts. I read books from the library. I went for long walks. For the first time in my adult life, I had no investments to track, no portfolio to manage, no deals to close. I had time. And in that time, I began to notice the world again. I noticed the way the sunrise looked after a long night at work, the taste of a good cup of coffee, the simple pleasure of a conversation with a stranger. My old life had been a frantic, high-stakes race for more. My new life was a quiet exploration of enough. A few years after the collapse, I had saved enough money to take a bus to visit my children. Seeing them in person was overwhelming. They were older, more themselves. My son was a quiet, thoughtful teenager. My daughter was a bright, talkative preteen. I spent a week there, staying in a cheap motel down the road from my ex-wife's sister's house. We didn't do anything fancy. We went to the park, we threw a baseball, we went to a local pizza place. I was just their dad, present and attentive. On my last day, my ex-wife and I sat on a park bench while the kids played on the swings. The sun was warm on our faces. "You seem different," she said. "Calmer." "I am," I said. I spent so many years chasing security, I never realized I was the most insecure person I knew. I needed the money, the house, all of it, to prove to myself that I wasn't my father, that I wasn't going to fail. "You were never going to be your father," she said softly. "You just couldn't see that. I don't know what the future holds. I will likely be paying off my debts for the rest of my life. I will never be a millionaire again. My children are growing up in a world without the privileges I once provided them. But they are growing up with a father who is present, a father who is honest, a father who knows the profound difference between a house and a home. I lost a fortune. I lost an empire, but I found something in the wreckage. I found a quiet sense of peace. I found that my value as a man is not measured by the size of my bank account, but by the integrity of my actions. I learned that true wealth isn't about having everything you want. It's about wanting the simple, beautiful, and priceless things you already have. My life is not a success story, not in the way the world usually defines it. But as I sit here in my small, quiet room, I feel a sense of contentment that my millions could never buy. I am no longer a king in a castle. I am just a man. And for the first time in my life, that feels like more than enough. Thanks for listening. I'm curious, have you ever had a moment that completely changed how you saw someone you thought you knew? Let me know in the comments, and remember to like and subscribe.